On today's World Insight, from a wintry backwater to a world-class winter sports hub, Zhangjiako's rags to riches story, thanks to the lasting legacy of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics and Paralympics. And on International Women's Day, a reality check on how far China has gone in protecting women's welfare and rights.
I'm Tian Wei, and this is World Insight. The 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics may have wrapped up, but the legacy remains. Thanks to the Games, about 300 million Chinese have taken up ice and snow activities. Its impact can even be felt at the ongoing annual political season in China. During a virtual media event with deputies of the National People's Congress, or NPC, I asked Guo Jianren, the head of Yuanzhiche village from North China's Zhangjiakou, which co-hosted the 2022 Winter Olympics and the Paralympic Games with Beijing.
I'm with CGTN. My question is directed to Guo Jianren. Now the Olympic Winter Games has concluded and you're working in Zhangjiakou, and the village that you're working at has achieved the game of hosting Olympic Winter Games. How has the Games changed the village?
I feel very proud of this. I am party branch secretary of the village. I have witnessed preparations for the Winter Olympics. The villagers got a leg up against poverty toward a moderately prosperous society. We've grown vegetables all seasons, and we have a better way of planting in our village that attracted a huge number of tourists. We are a small village, but last year we had more than 10,000 travelers. We are not just environmentally friendly, but we have improved the income of the villagers. Traditional per capita income was below 5,000, but right now, the average has hit 7,000. Some of the villagers are earning more than 20,000 yuan per year. So our village is a very good example of how the Winter Olympics has benefited China's economy. Because of the Games, we've seen big changes. Traditionally, we were just a remote backwater, but right now we have an airport, highways, and railway stations. All the villagers are making more money. There are more villagers traveling to other places by train or by airplane. We believe that snow and ice are invaluable assets.
Join me on Weigh In 2 sessions. All the NPC deputies at the virtual media event are all from the grassroots level of China. Every year, this is a really good opportunity to hear the real China stories, and also an opportunity to honor those unsung heroes who have been contributing to China every day. And today, March the 8th, marks the International Women's Day. It celebrates the social, economic, and political achievements of women across the world. We also have to mention women shines at China's 2 sessions. The proportion of female deputies at the NPC has increased to nearly 25% in the last 10 years. Women's welfare and also interests are parts of the basic human rights. Guarantees is needed for gender equity in the fields of politics, business, culture, and family. 30 years ago, China passed the specific law for the protection of women's rights. Last year, Chinese lawmakers sent a draft law to the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress to revise the 30-year law on the protection of women's rights and interests. I invited earlier an all-women panel to discuss it. Join me on Weigh In 2 sessions. I'm so glad to be joined by Dr. Lu Haina, Ms. Wang Yongmei, Ms. Dai Ruijun, and Ms. Zheng Zhenzhen. Thank you so much for all of you participating in our panel. I understand that more than 420,000 proposals were being provided by the public. When people are soliciting suggestions to the amendments on the law of protection of women's rights and interests, it is 100 more times than those proposal people would provide on the company law. So what does that say to you, Dr. Liu?
Oh, well, I think it's a very positive thing, and it says a lot about our society, and it says a lot about what's going on in our society. There are more people who are interested in women's issue and also interested in the gender equality issue in general, and especially the younger generation of women and girls. And in fact, many of people that I know have participated in this process, and they went to the website of NPC and wrote down their opinions on the draft amendments. And in fact, myself, I wrote more than 50 pieces of opinions on behalf of my employer, the Renmin University of China Law Schools, but I sent it directly to the NPC. And it says a lot about the fact that people have confidence in the law, and they believe that a better law could actually enhance women's rights protection in China. And also they believe in the mechanism of public participation in the lawmaking process.
Public participation is very important. Ms. Wang, you are a practicing lawyer. So tell me more about when you are helping women from different parts of China, how is this amendment to the law might mean to you?
I know the law is quite important. Actually, a lot of issue to the women currently, it is about the culture. So how we can change the culture is a quite hard part. But I should say the legislation definitely give or show some the social value and to give some the behavior standards and to lead the people to think and behavior. So when the behavior, the people, they will follow the law, and I hope they can change their mind and their beliefs. So finally they can change the culture. But I totally agree that this proposed revision, definitely, I reviewed all this revision. I should say it definitely would like to show the strong legal support to protect the women's rights.
When you say culture, what exactly you meant?
Actually, I helped a lot of victims in the sexual harassment case, domestic violence case. I should say I see some of the reason behind those cases are the power. I mean the unequal power. I mean the perpetrators would like to use their position, their resource, their impact or influence to control the victims in the sexual harassment case or the domestic violence case. Actually, that is the unequal power behind those cases, even the discrimination. And so those is a kind of the culture. And we are in the society, we must face the reality. The male, they think they have the even more power than the female. So they think they can use their advantage, I mean the power to control some victims. So that is the reality.
We've seen some evolution, isn't it, of the Chinese legislation for the protection of women's rights and interests. Ms. Dai, for example, the law was earlier in the 1990s came into being, revised twice in 2005 and 2018, and now it's the latest provision and amendments. How do you see, the evolution of these changes? What kind of logic is really behind it?
This law was established in 1992, and actually before we enacted this law, there is a very important international instrument, that is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which was adopted by the United Nations in 1979, and China is a party to this convention, and she maintains a regular dialogue with the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And in 2005, as you just mentioned, this law made a comprehensive amendment for the first time. and many of the contents refers to the convention and the suggestions from the committee. And this time it will go through the second comprehensive amendment. And according to the published amendment draft, there are many breakthroughs. For example, it intends to define what is discrimination against women. Another example is that the draft plans to establish a gender evaluation mechanisms of laws and policies and regulations at the national level to review whether there are provisions that discriminate women in the system. Of course, there are many other highlights and detailed and the executive provisions on in the amendments.
Ms. Wang, as a practitioner of law, you help with legal aid and work on pro bono cases with many others in China. So when you try to talk to the victims who you're trying to defend, how do they understand, usually the women and their families and friends, how do you find their understanding of their rights, and how do they see the implementations of the law might be able to help them?
That is a very good question. Actually, when the victims come to me or come to some organizations or come to others to ask for help, at first stage, they must be aware their rights. They should know they have such kind of the rights. They should know there is a law on anti-domestic violence law, and they know the sexual harassment is the bad thing to them. So the first stage, they must be aware they have the rights. And then they realize that their rights was being damaged, and then they ask for help. So that is the step by step. So I should say the good legislation will definitely lead the people's behavior and their thinking. But for my job is try to just help them within the legislation, within the rules. So back to your previous question, and how do I see the proposed revision? I should say I reviewed all the articles. There are still some very, very general articles, and they don't give the details how to just carry on, operate the legislation. So we need more explanation. And another side is, I would like to encourage the women to use the law, to make the law to be alive, to activate the law by case and case.
You're watching World Insight. Stay tuned. I will continue our discussion on the protection of women's rights and interests after I go to you also about quote-unquote activate the law. For lawyers like Ms. Wang, she's trying to help people who try to seek legal support. But how to make sure that the law will be more specific when it's implemented, it will really help with some of the cases in reality and as much as possible, and people know which part of the law could really help them, at least with their lawyer. So these are very pragmatic and yet very important for protecting the rights of the women.
Yes, just as Ms. Wang said, we should make the law alive. In my opinion, I think this amendment draft, gave us some highlights in the practice, because this time the amendment make this law make more concrete and more operative. In the past, we always say women's law are general principle and it could not use in the practice. But this time, the amendment made some efforts to make up these flaws. For example, it gave for example, the sexual harassment in this law, it gives us a list and demonstrate what forms of behavior will constitute sexual harassment. Not only the behavior with the sexual meaning, but also the oral, what you say maybe constitute sexual harassment. Besides this, maybe just show some pictures and images with sexual meaning could be considered and constitute sexual harassment. And this is what constitutes sexual harassment. Besides, what's the obligation of the companies and the schools to prevent and stop sexual harassment? In the past, the law just tell us, yes, the unit has the obligation. But this time, according to the amendment draft, it also give us a list what the unit should do. For example, there must be a regulation in the unit to prevent and stop sexual harassment, and it should appointed a person who is responsible to deal with this problem, and it also provides some, for example, the hotline or the mailbox who would like to claim for there is sexual harassment, and it also have some procedures to deal with these issues. So I think the amendment, give us very detailed guidance for the victims and for judges. Yeah.
So back to the extreme cases we have seen recently about the trafficking of women and also forced marriages in remote areas of China. Ms. Zheng, do you see the latest amendments will really help to deal with these situations?
Gender equality is not only written, but it should become a common sense. On that sense, I think a common sense is that everyone should be aware that protect the women's rights is a correct behavior. It's a right thing to do. And so I think we need not only amend the law, but also educate people on the law, on the gender equity. And so like everybody has that sense that we cannot ignore the violation of women's rights and interests. I think that's equally important.
Yeah, not only amend the law, but also amend the mind.
Yes.
I think that's what you're arguing in a way.
Yeah.
But let me come back to you, Dr. Lu. Also, it is mainly falling into the framework of protecting human rights. Women's rights are human rights, that's for sure. So how do you see the latest amendments will really help to deal with practical issues that women are facing?
Yes, as I said, I read the draft amendments carefully, and I personally wrote more than 50 pieces of opinions on the draft amendments. And I see that the draft amendments have strengthened the protection of personal rights of women and many other rights. As Professor Dai Ruijun has pointed out, it has a lot of shining spots. But I think it's also ongoing lawmaking process. I believe there will be more revision of the draft amendments. For example, it's possible that the law amendments would strengthen the local responsibilities towards the victims of trafficking and also the gender violence. So what I want to emphasize is that every progress that the law has made on gender equality can help reducing the human trafficking and also the gender violences. So everything that the law has done could help the situation to create a better legal culture and the environment for gender equality. Yes, that could help a lot with many issues with women's rights.
Also, to follow up to you about that, we understand that China's civil code was established last year. So how should we understand the latest amendments to the law on the protection of rights of women and their interests will fall into the adjustment to the civil code of China, and also to the overall international environment in which many countries have been trying to update their legislation on protection of women's rights?
Yes, civil code has made some progress on women's rights. For example, the sexual harassment at the workplace. That's the first time that NPC law addresses the sexual harassment at the workplace in particular. But still, it's not completely satisfactory, and it doesn't give a concept on sexual harassment or doesn't impose much responsibility on the employer. And this, with regard to this new amendments of women's law of China, that we hope there can be more responsibilities to be put on the employer side. For example, to provide victims with the right to seek remedies from the employer. And also the new amendments has said something about husband and wife within the family should share the unpaid care of the family equally, on the equal footing. And that's very important because something has been said about compensating women's unpaid care work in the family during the divorcing process. But the civil code is not very clear about that. So we hope this new amendment of the women's law could further clarify the standards for the unpaid care work in the family that's usually disproportionately assumed by the women. And also I want to say Chinese women is a big part of the female population in the world. So any progress that has been made on promoting Chinese women's rights would contribute significantly to the progress of women's rights in the world. So women in the world share the common future, and they're facing similar challenges and problems. So what we are doing here will be a big contribution to the world, to the women's rights at the global level.
So Ms. Wang, your thoughts?
From my point of view, if you ask me as a lawyer in the practical way, I should say the legislation is only the piece of paper. So from my hope, I hope we can change not the law on the protection of women's rights and interests. We should change some other rules, for example, the rules of evidence. So for some cases, it's not about the rights. Actually, the rights is on the paper, but how to realize the rights, we need case by case and how to show the evidence. The burden of the proof is definitely a key issue in majority of the case I deal with, to show the case, the judge, there is the harassment, there is the domestic violence, there is the unequal payment at the workplace. So I think that is the women's rights key issue all over the world, how to prove it, how to let the people see that is the issue for the women's rights and interests.
Well said. I'm sure, and I hope, those details and very crucial directions will be worked on as the days pass by. Thank you so much for the four of you for joining us. It's International Women's Day, so I want to congratulate all of you for your achievements, and happy International Women's Day. Thank you so much, ladies. And that's my discussion with the all-women panel on the latest revision to the law for protection of women's rights and interests in China. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of my team here at the 2 sessions and also in our Beijing headquarters. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.